What's up, everybody? We are back. Upper Hand Fantasy Podcast. We are going over the Fantasy Football Awards. All right, for the 2023 season. MVP, best value, best waiver wire pickup, best rookie, wide receiver, best rookie tight end. There's actually some rookie tight ends that have done something this year.
Crazy.
Most improved player, best comeback player. We just try to come up with as many awards as possible, right? Like when you don't have when you don't have to like create physical awards, just why not just create as many as you can?
Right.
Just like you get a trophy and you get a trophy and you get a trophy. Just award as many guys as you can, right? We only have one negative trophy, and that's the biggest bust, right? But outside of that, it's positivity, baby. It's only positivity. Okay, we're also going to go over playoff scenarios as well going into Week 18. There's a bunch of teams that need to win to get in. Some teams need some help. We're going to go over all of it. So you're going to be going into this weekend knowing exactly who needs to win, exactly what needs to happen for these teams to make the playoffs and for that to be set going into wildcard weekend. Okay, let's get it popping.
Let's get into it.
Okay, so listen, by the way, I know a lot of people are like, I'm hoping that Faraz can go over some Week 18 matchups and all that kind of. I'm not going to do it. Not going to do it. Why? Because I am boycotting your Week 18 championship, okay? It should not happen. Your championship needs to be in Week 17 and Week 17 only, and if championship is in Week 18, I cannot help you.
No, I hear that.
Right,
100%. Yeah, there's no reason to have a Week 18 championship. And let's see. Yeah, I'm in one league where it's like that, and it's no fun. You know, you have players just opting out of games. You know, they're being sat. Lamar Jackson's not going to play. Patrick Mahomes isn't going to play. All these top players, Matthew Stafford's not going to play. Like guys that you need to rely on. Like especially if it's a 2-week championship. Some people do a 2-week championship. Imagine having your guys like Week 17, and then Week 18 rolls around. It's like now you have just backups. You know what I'm saying? You don't want to deal with that. 100%. I agree with that. So I would say, I mean, the solution that I've seen to that happening is like I've seen both players that are in the championship decide that they're just going to split the pot for the winnings. You know, they're just like, okay, we're not going to leave this up to chance where one of us gets screwed by our players being out. They just split the pot, you know? So if you're in that situation, like that kind of works. You know what I'm saying? Because it gives you both.
I do want to say something about the split pot thing. For Week 18, I get it. But for Week 17, like if you, like let's say you're going into Week 17 and one of the guys wants to split the pot beforehand and you decide like, all right, you know what, no matter what happens, we'll do 70-30, 50-50, whatever. I hate it.
No. I'm not advocating for that in Week 17. Like, forget about that. But Week 18?
100%. Yeah. But, like, I've seen it, and I've even gotten DMs about it, like, hey, like, what should the split be between these two lineups? And I'm just like, what? What?
Yeah.
Play the game. Whoever wins gets 100%. The other person gets 0.
It's exactly how it works in the NFL. There's a reason you play the game. You don't play the game on paper. Because you could look at a matchup on paper and be like,
to win the game.
Yeah, that's it. Don't
Can
ever
you imagine making it all the way to your championship and then like you make it all the way to the championship and then now like you get there and you're like, oh well, I don't need to worry about what happens here because I already split the pot.
Yeah, and then like if you initiate, if you're the one that says like, oh, we need to split the pot, you're definitely getting like the 30 end of it instead of the 70. You know what I'm saying? Because like the other person would have to agree to it. It's dumb. Like if you made it to the championship, obviously you've done something right. That's just bailing out. I mean, I get it. Like in betting, there's cash outs. You know, you want to maximize your winnings and minimize the risk and that kind of thing. Cash outs are fine. It's different. Yeah. You're right. But like with fantasy football, it's a week-to-week thing. The best team could have the worst performance, and I've seen that so many times. I had that happen to me. So it's like any given week. We talked about it last time. You said it's like the game is any given week. Why would you leave it like that? Like that's. Especially if your team ends up winning, like you're going to look back and be like, man, I regret that. Like I'd rather have a shot at 100% of it and have a chance at 0 than take 30 and then know that I missed out on even bigger just because I didn't believe in myself, which is stupid. You know, just let it go.
You know, I am a cash out guy. Like if I got like a 7-leg parlay and I got like, you know, a bunch of them and I get a little cash out, get some free money, I'm taking it.
Sometimes you got to see the green. You got to see the green sometimes. I've done that before.
All right.
I had anytime touchdown scorer parlay. I remember it was a 4-leg, and I had Nico Collins as my last leg. I was like, I don't think it's going to happen. I cashed out. Luckily, it didn't happen. So I actually made money on that, but that was good.
That feels good.
Yeah.
That feels good. We posted on Instagram, we ended up posting our MVP voting, right? And the in our community over on Instagram voted for their fantasy football MVP for 2023. I will not share the results with you on this podcast because we are going to reveal it over on Instagram at Upper Hand Fantasy. Okay. But we can tell you who the candidates were. Okay. Yeah. CD Lamb, obviously, right?
Right.
23 points per game this year, and he absolutely killed it when it mattered in the fantasy playoffs. Tyreek Hill, got definitely, if you had Tyreek Hill on your team, you definitely made the playoffs, right? Like there's like a 90% chance you made the playoffs. But when you got there, it wasn't so hot.
No.
Right? Because he got hurt and it wasn't great. And you can tell that he wasn't himself. Puka Nacua, who is nominated, spoiler alert, he's nominated for like 7 awaards that we have going on right now. Okay.
He fits like the bill for every single one of them.
He really does. He really does. Okay. 17.8 fantasy points per game. And just a reminder, Cooper Kupp is on that team. Okay. Yeah. Christian McCaffrey, 24.5 points per game. He is the league leader in fantasy points per game. Okay. So he's the guy who's been doing it every single week, Mr. Consistent, and Mr. Give me fantasy points every single week without fail. He did get hurt in the championship. That sucks.
You can't hold that against him.
He did kind of, get it done for you beforehand. Like it wasn't his ceiling, but at least he didn't leave after like 2 points.
Yeah.
Mike Evans, 17.3 fantasy points per game. The dude was a baller every single week. Top 10 wide receiver all year long.
Kind of a surprise.
Raheem,
I think that's kind of what has him.
So surprised.
You know what I'm saying?
Hey, Zach, do you remember before the season when we said that when we talked about Mike Evans and Chris Godwin potentially being last year's DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett?
Yeah.
Do you remember that?
I remember that. That was you. That wasn't me. I wasn't a believer.
Yeah.
Sorry. I was like, we saw this once with
I even found the tweet. Maybe our editors can find the tweet and then put it up here. But yeah, basically I tweeted that out. I tweeted out a lot of stuff. A lot of stuff is wrong. But, it's one of those things where it's kind of a lesson, right? And it happened 2 years in a row where when you have talented, very, very talented wide receivers, it probably makes sense to just bet on them, especially when the price is so low. Because Mike Evans was drafted in the 7th round. Okay. Yeah. And we'll talk about all the values, and he's definitely a candidate for the best value, for sure. And I think he probably fits the bill for the best value more so than the fantasy MVP.
But he's a candidate.
And then you have Brock Purdy. He's a candidate. Brock Purdy, 19.2 fantasy points per game. Kyron Williams, absolutely killed it. He did miss a chunk of games, but he was literally second in the NFL in 100-yard games behind Christian McCaffrey, and he still missed 4 games. Okay, and he didn't even have the full role like that first week or two. Right?
Yeah, you look at Kyron Williams. One thing on him, you talk about the points per game, but total points, he was the RB5, I think, on the season, and he missed those games, 4 games. So it's like,
crazy.
Come on, like that's just ridiculous. No one saw that coming either.
Absolutely. All right, drum roll, please. Zach, who is your fantasy MVP?
All right, should we do an actual drum roll? I could tap on my desk. Like, can you? I don't know if you can hear that, but it's there.
I can.
Good. There it is. Anyway, my fantasy MVP. The easy answer is Christian McCaffrey. We all knew that he would be as long as he stayed healthy. He beat the injury-prone allegations last year, which made no sense, by the way, when he was with the Panthers. Leads the league in touchdowns this year. Is anyone surprised? Not at all. So in the interest of making this award actually interesting and not just defaulting to CMC, because it would be easy to just say CMC. Like, you can't say that he isn't. I'm just going to pick somebody else. I think I'm going to choose.
I wonder who it's going to be.
Who is it going
to be? I wonder who it's going to be.
Who is it going to be? Now, listen, there's a reason that I'm picking this player, and it's not because I'm a Cowboys fan, but I'm going with CD Lamb. There's an argument for Tyreek Hill, on a per-game basis. Tyreek Hill outscored CD Lamb by 0.7 of a point per game. But Lamb was available for all of his games this year, and he fell in the single digits just once all season. 9 points against San Francisco earlier in the season when he was in a slump. He was dragging his feet to open the year, but so was the entire Cowboys offense, right? And he finally showed some signs of life in Week 6 against the Chargers before the bye. And boy, I just remember sitting there. We were like, is this a prime selling window for CD Lamb? Hopefully you did not. And we did talk about him as a sell in this podcast, which feels bad. But if you had CD Lamb,
and that is my worst call of all time. Absolutely.
All time, you think?
Like, it makes me feel, hell yeah, this is the worst call of all time. Not just by me, just by anybody. Like, it was all time.
It was
all time.
The general consensus.
And the all-time worst fantasy advice in the world.
Yeah. Nothing could have prepared you for what came after the bye week. You know what I'm saying? Like, you were sitting there. If you held on to him, like, you were just vindicated. You know what I'm saying? You have your guy.
Oh, yeah.
But I think it's the consistency and the elite level of production that you got from Lamb, plus the timing of his breakout. Like, the timing really changes things for me, too, in my opinion. You know, that makes him the MVP. If you had him early in the year, there's a good chance you were just kind of muddling through the fantasy season up until week 8. And then after that, he didn't let you down at all. Not once. He had at least 16 PPR points in every game from week 8 on. That's 10 games. He led the NFL in receiving yards by 300 in that span. He had the highest target share of any receiver in that span at 32.7%. Led the league in receptions by 25 over the next guy. In scrimmage touchdowns with 11. And in fantasy points per game by a whole touchdown. And then also in total fantasy points scored in that span, all receivers by 100 fantasy points. That's 100 fantasy points. He had 100 more fantasy points than any other receiver from week 8 on. That's just ridiculous. There's a good chance if you had him that you just straight up didn't lose down the stretch, or at least not by any fault of his. I had him in my dynasty league from week 8 on. I went undefeated. Like, that is MVP type of performance. You know, then you look at his playoff matchups. Did he come through when it really mattered? Yep. Again, he led all the players in fantasy points per game from weeks 15 to 17. 3 straight top 10 performances, never less than 18. 40 points in your championship. That's a definition of most valuable fantasy player. And it's not just because I'm a Cowboys fan. They say better late than never. But for Lamb, becoming the league's best fantasy receiver in 2023, it was hardly late at all. And it just changed the trajectory of any team that had him on a dime. It was just, he was the MVP down the stretch. And like I said, that timing, the fact that it came at week 8, it's not about how you start, it's how you finish. He carried you into the championship, I'm sure, way more often than not. If you had CD Lamb, you were definitely in contention.
So it is between him and CMC for me, but I actually do also give the edge to CD Lamb. Why? Because of the performance, the cherry on top that he gave you in week 17 in the championship week. 40 points in championship week to just top it all off to win you your championship. To me, that's why he's the fantasy MVP.
Yes. Oh, okay. I love it. Vindication.
I am with you. It's just really sad for me, to be honest with you. Best value. Okay, here are the candidates for best value pick. Okay, these are guys who were drafted. Okay, so like guys like Puka Nacua, wouldn't be here, right? Guys like Kyron Williams who weren't drafted. I'm using the 15th round in 12-team leagues as like the standard. Okay, Rachaad White, okay, was drafted in the 6th and 7th rounds. Mike Evans was drafted in the 7th round. Michael Pittman drafted in the 7th round. Raheem Mostert drafted in the 11th round. And then Brock Purdy and Jordan Love were drafted in the 14th and 15th rounds. You know, both of those guys were available on waivers in a lot of leagues early on as well. But since their ADPs fall in the 15th round or before or prior, I will include them in this discussion. Zach, who's your pick?
My pick, there's an argument for Brock Purdy and Jordan Love because technically they scored the most points of any of these guys. They both had over 300 total points on the season, but they're quarterbacks. You know, quarterbacks are kind of replaceable. I'm going with Raheem Mostert. You know, you can make an argument with Jordan Love or Brock Purdy, but they were drafted the way back. We see late-round quarterbacks pop up all the time as top 10 guys, a lot more often at least than we see back-end running backs pop up as top 10 guys, and Raheem Mostert was top 3. You know, he wasn't even a thought as a potential running back one coming into the season. You know, the Dolphins had Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. You know, it was a 3-man backfield, and this, that, the other. You know, nobody saw this huge season coming, and that's what makes him the best value of the season. You know, there was a path for Purdy to be a top fantasy quarterback. Just look at his weapons. You know, Rachaad White, we talked about him. He was obviously a value, but Raheem Mostert still outscored him, and White was going a few rounds earlier in drafts in the dead zone. That's what I'm saying. You know, Mostert wasn't even a dead zone running back. This guy just at the back of drafts. It was a dart throw. You know, you weren't thinking you were getting a whole lot when you drafted Raheem Mostert. You drafted him probably as depth as your RB3. and then to have that running back ascend to RB1 status, that changes the whole complexion of your roster and your whole season. The fact that he's a running back makes him all the more valuable. High-end RB1s don't grow on trees. We know that. But quarterbacks, very replaceable. Wide receivers, too. Outside of the top guys, you can replace them pretty easily because there's just so many of them. But running backs, you could have drafted CMC and then also grabbed Raheem Mostert with a flyer later on, and then suddenly you end up with 2 of the top 3 running backs in total points. So you're not getting that type of game-changing value from any other player. I'm going with Raheem Mostert here because he just absolutely dominated from pretty much day one. He didn't have a whole lot of bad games. Get him in the 11th round. I like the value there. That's huge, huge value.
Yeah, it's really close between Rachaad White, Raheem Mostert, and Mike Evans. Like, all those guys like are really good. Mike Evans, the thing with him is that he was consistent from the get, right? Like he started like as soon as the season began, like he was just getting it done for you every single week, right? And he didn't really have any days off. Like if you look at his game log, he literally got it done all the way from week 1, starting week 1, 18.6 fantasy points. He started the season, 6 catches, 5 catches, 1 touchdown in each of those games, 171-yard game mixed in there. And then, he didn't really have a bad game all season long. So, I'm looking at Mike Evans as, one of those guys. But, I think I have to default to Raheem Mostert as well just because of the ceiling that he showed. If I had to really kind of narrow it down, it would be between Raheem Mostert and Rachaad White for me. Like pick your, what would you rather have? Rachaad White, he was the definition of consistency, right? He was the second most consistent running back behind Christian McCaffrey. Okay, right. It was Christian McCaffrey number 1, Raheem Mostert number 2, in consistency. And Raheem Mostert, the difference between him and Rachaad White was that he had those boom weeks, right? He had 4 top 5 finishes compared to Rachaad White's only, 1 top 5 finish this year. So I'm going to have to give the nod to Mostert as well, but I think Rachaad White is very, very close.
Yeah, Rachaad White's close. You don't want to take away from him, but they're 2 different running backs in terms of if you want to put them, and obviously you can't say they're archetypes because I don't expect this to hold up season to season, but for this season, you look at the type of running backs they were. Raheem Mostert was winning you weeks 100% with some of his performance because he had those top 5 finishes. Rachaad White was, I don't want to say he was just keeping you from winning. It's not like he was a bad running back or anything, but he also had a little bit of a slow start to start the season. And he also had some games where, yes, he was consistent, but he was putting up like 13, 15 fantasy points, which isn't bad. You look at that in the game log, it looks good, but then you have it in your game during the week. It's like, well, Rachaad White could have had more points. It would be nice to have that type of production. That upside wasn't always there with Rachaad White. So I think that's the difference. But Rachaad White still, I think he fits the category of another award we're giving out later on. Most improved. We'll talk about that soon enough. But I'm going to go with Raheem Mostert here. I'm sticking with that one.
There's a lot of good waiver wire pickups this week. Who is the best waiver wire pickup for 2023? It's between Puka Nacua, Kyron Williams, C.J. Stroud, Sam Howell, Tank Dell, Sam Laporta, and Trey McBride. Okay. Now, a few of these guys weren't available all year long, right? The guys who were available all year long, Puka Nacua, Kyron Williams, Sam Howell, until when it mattered.
Playoffs,
right?
Yeah.
So
of course,
I might have to eliminate Sam Howell, but I want to give Sam Howell his fantasy flowers because he was getting it done all year long up until the fantasy playoffs, right? He was a top 7-8 quarterback, in that span. You know what? Let's actually take a look at exactly where he was at.
That. Oh, I don't know why I say that every single time we go to dig up a stat, but I know that it was like on a commercial or something.
It's not that.
That's what I say. Yeah.
So it was until the bye week basically. His bye week was in week 14. So I'm going to look at the quarterbacks from week. I'm going to look at the quarterbacks from week 1 to week 13. Average.
He was definitely
PPR,
top 8.
PPR was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. He was the QB7 during that span. Okay, so he got it done. Okay, so let's give Sam Howell his flowers. Now, Tank Dell would have probably, been way, way, way up there, right? But number 1, he missed 1 week in the beginning of the season.
Yep.
And then he got hurt and couldn't contribute to the rest of your fantasy season. So unfortunately, I think injury might have derailed him from getting this award.
Yeah.
Okay. But Tank Dell, if you see my dynasty rankings, Tank Dell's a top 20 wide receiver in dynasty for me. Okay?
Very nice. I'm in agreement.
He's
100%.
he's a baller. Okay,
Yeah.
so take a look at those dynasty rankings, fully updated earlier this week, upperhandfantasy.com. Okay, Sam Laporta, he's up there, man. Like, listen, it took a little while for him to come on, but he ended up doing his thing and ended up being a very, very good tight end for you. Same thing with Trey McBride, but again, it took an injury for Trey McBride to end up getting the opportunity.
Yeah.
So it was later in the year. So, it had, in my opinion, and then CJ Stroud, similar thing where like he missed some games, some key games for you, right? Early on in the year, you weren't starting him. So it's one of those things like if you picked up Puka, you picked up Kyron Williams, you were probably starting them as soon as you picked them up.
Yeah.
Right?
100%.
And I think because of that, it's probably between those two guys, right?
It's the only answer. Like I love all the other
Yeah.
guys. Like technically, I know there are people who picked up C.J. Stroud. He was a difference maker for them. I know people who picked up Sam Howell, and he made a big he was a difference maker for them. But you can't say it's not one of these two Rams rookies. And it's funny because they're both 5th round rookies, and it's just a hilarious way to play it out.
Well, remember, Kyron's not a rookie.
Not
he
rookie.
seems
5th
like a
round.
rookie.
Sorry, excuse me. That's my fault.
Yeah, he seems like a rookie because he hardly
Yeah,
played in year one, right? So it's like he's maybe he might be some other awards here.
Yeah.
That he could be
Rookie running
available
back.
for too. So is Puka, rookie running.
Yeah. That's what we're going with. I don't know, but we kind of foreshadowed this one a little bit on the episode earlier in the week. But I'm gonna go with Puka Nacua here. Kyron Williams is a close second, and like I just talked about with Raheem Mostert, running backs, they're just inherently more valuable than receivers because there's a lot fewer of them than receivers. But in this case, that grace that I usually afford a running back like Kyron Williams, that's wiped out because he missed 4 games in the middle of the year. Yeah, that's out of his control. But Puka was not only available for every game this year, but he averaged 18 points per game on his own in them too. And that's with Cooper Kupp on the offense. And that was with Kyron Williams doing his thing too. Puka's 4th in the NFL in receiving yards. He had 9 top 12 finishes, scored in the double digits in all but 4 of his games. When you talk about the best waiver wire pickups, I look at it a lot as like adding points to your team that you weren't necessarily supposed to have. That's what it felt like starting Puka in the first 5 weeks of the season. It was like getting a head start on your opponent. He had 10 or more targets in 4 of those 5 games. Ironically, his 2 games with 10 or more receptions were the first 2 weeks of the season. That was when he really put himself on the map. And he had 20 or more PPR points in 4 of those first 5 games. Kyron Williams, he's ridiculous. I'll acknowledge that. Just the usage that he's getting and the production that he had on top of it, the touchdowns, just fantastic. But there was a big chunk out of the middle of the season with him. It ended up being 5 games missed technically, quote unquote, because he was out anyway for the Rams bye in week 10. But Puka was in your lineup every single week this year, even though you didn't know who he was a week before the season started. I guess I should say you didn't know who he was if you didn't listen to this podcast. But the point remains, he wasn't on anyone's radar, and now he's going to be a surefire top pick next year. So he's the best waiver wire pickup by far for me, Puka Nacua.
100%, man. And you look at his stats. He had 10 top 24 weeks. Okay, which is only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 other players had that or more. 6 other wide receivers, I should say. He had 4 top 5 finishes at the wide receiver position. Only CeeDee Lamb, Tyreek Hill had more than him, and only DJ Moore and Nico Collins had the same amount as him. Okay, so he was a baller, and the fact that you can pick up this type of wide receiver 1, fantasy wide receiver 1, on the waiver wire and him be available all year long, you got to give it to him.
Yeah.
So congratulations, Puka Nacua. You are our best waiver wire pickup of the year.
And it's crazy because he went from 0 to 100. It took him no time in the Rams offense to just get going. That's the one thing that's really surprising. That's what makes him feel like such a slam dunk waiver wire pick, because he started the season hot and he never got off the gas. You know what I'm saying? He just kept going. So that also plays into it. Just that, thought of, okay, this guy came in and immediately was, contributing to your team. And it didn't change once Cooper Kupp came back. It came down a little bit, but it wasn't drastic at all.
By the way, like I didn't include Nico Collins in the best value award. He should have been there, but I have another award, similar, best late round pick. Okay, and I narrowed it down between the 2 quarterbacks that I mentioned earlier, Brock Purdy and Jordan Love. I brought in Sam Laporta as well, and then Nico Collins is the other one.
Mhm.
And the answer is clear for me personally. And I know that Sam Laporta got it done, but like I got to go with Nico Collins, man. Like Nico Collins, when he was out there, he was in your lineup every single week. He got it done for you. He had big boom weeks. Sam Laporta did too. But I think Nico Collins, every single week he was available, you kind of knew what you were going to get from him, even in games with Tank Dell. The fact that he ended up missing those 2 games with the calf injury, the fact that he only missed one each of those times, like it means a lot, right? Like he didn't let that linger, which means that he really was looking out for us.
Yeah.
So we appreciate you, Nico,
Yeah.
and you have a soft spot in my heart because you were on every single one of my fantasy football teams this year.
Yeah, and he was on every single one of your like late round flyer lists, all that stuff. Like, go get Nico Collins. I
Yeah.
remember because you were on that earlier. The thing is, it kind of felt like, to go back on what you're talking about, missing only one game with a calf injury. It kind of felt like 2 weeks that second time, where he went down really early in the game against the Jets, and then he missed the
Right.
next week against the Titans. So that was a little disappointing. This is especially right at the start of the fantasy playoffs. I'm not taking away from what Nico Collins did. He had a fantastic season. I think he could have had an even better season if CJ Stroud stayed healthy and, he was able to play a full season. But for me, I'm going to use that as an excuse to not pick him. I'm going to go with Jordan Love. And I'm rolling with Jordan Love here over Brock Purdy and over guys like Nico Collins because Jordan Love did exactly what every fantasy manager hoped he would do when they took flyers on him late in drafts. With Brock Purdy, we knew there was a baseline to be had because the offense he was on. Just look at the weapons. There wasn't a rush. You didn't get like this rush of intrigue when you took Brock Purdy in your drafts this past summer. And that's perfectly fine. That doesn't have to be the case when you draft your second quarterback in the 14th round because there wasn't that intrigue with Purdy. He didn't feel like a flyer in a traditional sense of the term. But with Jordan Love, there was an acknowledgement that, there's some upside here. We don't know what Jordan Love is. There's a little bit of mystery. I think that adds to like the fantasy draft experience just a little bit. You're taking a flyer, and there's a chance for some upside here. There's also a floor too. We didn't see anything close to a large enough sample size to determine Jordan Love's value, but it makes sense that when you're taking a flyer and he could appreciate into something much more valuable than other players coming off the board in his range, that you get that rush. And he did that. He finished outside the top 16 in just 3 weeks this year, scored 20 or more points in over half of his games. He really came on down the stretch too. From week 7 to 17, Love had 2 or more total touchdowns in 8 of his 11 games. The difference that makes Love the pick for me is that people weren't really surprised to see Purdy perform as well as he did. But with Love, there was an element of surprise with how productive he was. So I'm going with that. He was a top 5 quarterback in total points at the end of the season. You got him that late in the draft. It feels weird because we weren't expecting this, I don't think. But I'm just going to play off of that 100%. I think that was a pleasant surprise that makes him, in my mind, the best late round pick. And Nico Collins was too. But Jordan Love played every game. And again, I'm going to fall back on that argument. Nico Collins missed a couple games.
I like the surprise factor.
That's what it was.
I like that as being yeah.
That was
like
the
that.
deciding
Okay.
factor because it was just nice to see one of these players work out because we knew that upside was there and then it actually came through.
Now, one of the categories that we have here is best rookie wide receiver, and I think we can say right now that it's Puka Nacua, right? But
Easy answer.
Yep. I did want to mention the other guys, right? Tank Dell, already talked about him. Jackson Smith and the Jigba, had a solid season, right? Like, he didn't have, he didn't blow you out of the water. He did have 2 other very good wide receivers that he was playing against. You might have been hoping for a little bit, of a better year. But 60 catches, 614 yards, 4 touchdowns through 16 games. Not bad. Not bad.
I'll take it.
Right? he didn't have a 1,000-yard season, okay? And this is not necessarily, me saying that, he deserves to be a fantasy MVP, the best rookie wide receiver for fantasy, not even close, right? There are other wide receivers that, are much more deserving, but I think that, we're so hasty to determine like whether these guys are good in the NFL or not. I still think that Jason is going to be a very, very good wide receiver, at some point. Okay. So
Yeah.
don't get too hasty with him. Don't like think that his value has dropped tremendously after taking him in your maybe at the 101 or 102 in your rookie drafts like last year. I wouldn't be too worried about it. Okay.
No.
I have Zay Flowers here, Jordan Addison, Rashi Rice, Jaden Reed, and then guys like Josh Downs and Demario Douglas. We're gonna get into a dynasty buy and sell episode at some point in a couple weeks now. I can tell you right now that Demario Douglas is going to be on there. Josh Downs will likely be on there as well, as two guys you could buy for cheap in Dynasty, especially Demario Douglas. But these other guys here, Jordan Addison obviously started the year really, really hot, with Kirk Cousins. He ended up, doing his thing. Zay Flowers, right? He ended up, having a monster end to his season, which was really, really awesome to see. I think it was, if I'm not mistaken, he ended the season top 15 in 4 of 5 in his last 4 or 5 games, if I'm not mistaken. Let me double check that one.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure he absolutely just killed it at the end of the year. Only one bad game. Let's see. Zay Flowers finished as a top 13 or higher wide receiver in his 4 of his last 5 games.
I wish it was like a clean cut number, like if it was just wide receiver 12. You know what I'm saying? Because that would make him a wide receiver 1 in 4 out of the last 5 games. Of course, that's be like the wide receiver 13. When you're trying to put together these arguments, it's just like, I wish it would be easier. Just say wide receiver 1. Of course, you have to have wide receiver 13. Like, why wide receiver 13? Because that's what it was. He was good. That's the answer. Yeah, but Zay Flowers had a great end of the season. But I think Jordan Addison probably could have been the best fantasy wide receiver if Kirk Cousins was able to stay healthy. You know what I'm saying? And obviously, Justin Jefferson missed some time, so that changed things. But Jordan Addison had 7 touchdowns for the first 8 weeks, and that was second in the league behind Tyreek Hill. Like, he could have had an absolutely nuclear season. So he was one of those guys. I remember, was he one of your guys? I remember, like, we did our
he was one of your guys.
He was? Yeah. I know that we were both on him, but I remember we both talked about him as like, this is a guy that really has a chance to come through this season. The offense that he's on, the scheme. If Kirk Cousins stayed healthy, Jordan Addison probably would have had like 13 touchdowns. Like, I don't want to say.
Oh, are you talking about Jordan Addison or Zay Flowers?
Jordan Addison. I said.
Oh, I'm sorry. So Jordan Addison was my guy.
Yeah.
Jordan Addison, my guy. Zay Flowers was your guy.
Yeah. And Zay Flowers had a good end of the season. But Jordan Addison, if Kirk Cousins stayed healthy, Kirk Cousins himself too also would have had a ridiculous season. But not Zay Flowers, Jordan Addison, he could have had a very, very good fantasy season. Like I said, I would have said like 1,000 yards, 13 touchdowns. Obviously, it's easy to just extrapolate and say that's what it would have been. But if Kirk Cousins played, I think he would have definitely been challenging Puka Nacua. Because Puka was great. He only had 5 touchdowns, I think it was. Was that what it was? 5 total? I'm not sure what it was, the number. But we know Jordan Addison was very good. And Tank Dell, like we mentioned. I don't know why the Texans decided to use him as a lead blocker in the middle of a pile at the goal line. That's when he got injured, screwed up his season. Let's not do that in the future. Just take notes. You know what I'm saying?
But yeah, Puka only scored 5 touchdowns in this season. Jordan Addison, he ended up scoring 4, 5, 6, 7 touchdowns in the first 8 games of the season. Okay, yeah. And then scored 2 in week 15. So almost a double-digit touchdown season in his rookie year. Very, very good year for Jordan Addison. All these guys, very, very promising years ahead, for all these guys. And we'll get to a lot of these rookie wide receivers and what to expect for them moving forward. We're going to be talking more about that in our Dynasty episodes coming up. What about rookie tight end? Sam Laporta, Dalton Kincaid, Luke Musgrave, Michael Mayer. I think the answer is pretty clear that it's Sam Laporta.
You think so? Trey McBride came on at the end of the season. Like, he's not a rookie. My bad. Sam Laporta. I'm mixing this up because we didn't see Trey McBride at all last season. It took an injury. That's what it was.
Exactly.
That's why I'm getting mixed up. That's my fault. Yeah, don't worry. I didn't pick him. He wasn't my pick, but I did have him in my consideration for some reason. Whatever reason, it's fine. But Sam Laporta, yeah, he's the easy answer.
Well, listen, it's not just you, because I initially also had him in this list as a rookie.
It's crazy.
And I had to remove him.
Yeah.
From these notes.
Yeah.
So if you might have seen that
might have been it. It was
just
like, the double justification. It's like, oh yeah, no, this is right. He is a rookie, that kind of thing. Yeah. You look at the rest of this list. Like, Dalton Kincaid had his weeks. Luke Musgrave, he was injured a lot. Michael Mayer, he looked like he was going to be something, and then just kind of fizzled out because the Raiders' offense was the Raiders' offense. It's definitely going to be Sam Laporta. Like, there's no question who it is. I don't think there's a whole lot of explanation there. We talked about Sam Laporta a lot.
No.
He had those boom weeks at the end. That was great. And he's going to continue to be right in that conversation. He could be. Is he Dynasty tight end 1? I don't know. I think he has to be.
I think it's him. I think it's Mark Andrews, and I think it's Trey McBride as the top 3 right now.
Do you think it would be? Do you think Hawkinson would be in there if he didn't get that ACL injury? Like, does that change
Yes.
it? I think he would be, because now I'm not sure. He's
Yeah.
right on the border of that age.
I think Hawkinson would be probably 1 or 2 for me.
Yeah.
I would say. If and also it's like we kind of want to know who the quarterback is, but even with the quarterback change that we saw in Minnesota, he just kept getting it done. It didn't matter. Right. So I think in this scheme he's going to get it done regardless, but the injury kind of messed him up a little bit. But yeah, same with Porter. Okay, best rookie quarterback. I think there's no question here that it's C.J. Stroud.
Yeah.
But I do want to acknowledge Anthony Richardson in the very, very limited sample size that he had this year. He looked like he belonged, man. And I think one of the biggest question marks about Anthony Richardson was if he's going to be able to pass the ball successfully, right, in the NFL.
Right.
That was the biggest question that I had. His athleticism, his ability to rush the football. There was no questions around that.
Right.
But the questions that I had around whether he'd be successful passing the ball, he answered those questions for me in the limited sample size. And then on top of that, you add the scheme that he's playing in, like Gardner Minshew's having some success with here. But we already knew that this scheme was going to be good for any quarterback, right? Because we know that they have a very, very good play caller in Shane Steichen. So for me personally, Anthony Richardson's going to have a monster career. Let's hope that he can continue. Hopefully he can stay healthy. But he has already shown massive upside. Week 1, 22 fantasy points. Week 2, almost 18 fantasy points. He missed week 3. Week 4, almost 30 fantasy points, and then he got hurt in week 5. That shoulder injury ended up derailing his entire season.
That pisses me off because he would definitely. I think he would definitely be the best rookie quarterback in terms of fantasy. I can't say the same of like, is he going to have the success C.J. Stroud had? Would they have the same success? I'm not sure. In terms of just NFL winning games, whatever. But when I look at his game log, and it sucks because it's so short, but you look at the production, and what does the production that he had remind you of? Does it remind you of any other player that we've seen already get it done in fantasy football? Like, does it look like
Cam Newton?
No. Does it look like Jalen Hurts at all? Especially early.
Who does it look like? Oh,
Does
Jalen Hurts.
Like Jalen Hurts at all, especially early, rushing touchdowns in every game he started and played all the way through. He had 4 rushing touchdowns in 3 full games. Like, come on! And then you add the complement of the passing attack with Shane Steichen. Like, and who was Shane Steichen's quarterback? Who was Jalen Hurts' offensive coordinator? It's like there's levels here, and they're all connecting. If Anthony Richardson can stay healthy, he's definitely going to be a top 5 quarterback. I'm going to make that call. Hopefully, he can stay healthy. But if he's healthy, I think he's top 5 next season because he showed us already he's ridiculous. And the Colts offense is not bad. They have plenty of weapons. Josh Downs is there. Michael Pittman is there. They still have Jonathan Taylor in the backfield. Like, this is a good team. So I like Anthony Richardson. That's a good call. The answer, though, for best rookie quarterback, just by default, has to be C.J. Stroud because there wasn't anybody else. And I don't want to not mention Bryce Young because you can't analyze. He's not going to be best rookie quarterback at all. But I think you also can't just like cast him aside because the offense he was in was terrible. The coaching was not good. The whole Panthers organization is having trouble. I'm giving him a full mulligan this year. I'm pretty much going to treat him again like a rookie next year, like I've been doing with Trey McBride. But at this point, but I don't know what you think on Bryce Young. Do you think he still has a chance? Like, I think the jury's still out, right? You have to give him a second shot here.
The jury's definitely still out, but I'm not giving him a full mulligan though. I think he showed a lot of bad signs, and that's missing open wide receivers in clean pockets. That's my biggest issue with him. Leaving the pocket early when he doesn't have to. There are a lot of issues, I think, right now that he has to clean up. There are definitely issues with the offense, no doubt about it. The play calling, the play design, really, really bad. The weapons, the lack of weapons, unbelievable, right? Like, so I think there is, an equal amount of blame for the GM, for the coaching, for the play calling, all that. So, yes, I think the jury's still out of Bryce Young for sure. He is not a bust yet or anything like that. Okay, but I do want to get back to C.J. Stroud for a sec. The most fantasy points per game, PPR rookies. Okay, Deshaun Watson was number 1. Cam Newton was number 2. Justin Herbert was next up, followed by RG3, and then C.J. Stroud.
blast from the past with RG3.
Some good company.
That is good company, 100%.
I mean, RG3's rookie season was just like so fun to watch.
Yeah,
unless you're a Cowboys fan. It was unbelievable.
He destroyed us.
Yeah, man. You know him and
oh my god.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, man. Him and Alfred Marks. Yeah. Him and Alfred Marks.
That was looking like the next big one too. Oh my god, what a time to be alive.
Okay. I have another category here called most underrated difference maker. Okay, these are guys that got it done for you in a big way, but a lot of start-sit questions around them, or not getting the praise that they deserve. The guys that I have in this category, and I put these names in myself, is DJ Moore, Michael Pittman, James Conner, and David Njoku. And I think later on in the season, I think David Njoku definitely got his props because national game, he got it done.
Yeah, Joe Flacco
against the Jets and Joe Flacco. A lot of talk about that. So I think he got his flowers, for the most part, towards the end of the season. I think James Conner, definitely did not. Okay, because when you look at what he's done, in his last, I think it was 4 games, if I'm not mistaken, he got it done for you, and on an offense that had literally no weapons, no answers, not a good offense. He was the RB5 in week 13, the RB11 in week 15, the RB4 in week 16, and then the RB4 again in week 17. Okay, and he was not getting it done at all before that, right? Early on in the year, he had some good games, and then he got hurt, and then he just wasn't the same guy. But when it mattered, this is the second year in a row, or maybe the third year in a row, where James Conner is just having these crazy fantasy finishes, and you just love to see it. Actually, I can pull up 2022 real quick. Yep.
Yeah,
so
you did it.
Ready?
I'm looking at it.
Week 10 RB2, week 11 this is last year. Week 11 RB14, and then going on until week 17 RB4, RB6, RB12, RB4. And then in week 17, RB15, right? So he has a knack for getting it done, later in the year. In 2021, he ended up getting hurt late. But even in, the first week of the playoffs, he ended up being the RB11 and the RB2 in 2021. So, he has a knack for getting it done in the playoffs. And James Conner, if you had him in your lineup, he definitely helped you win.
So is James Conner officially Mr. December at running back? That kind of has to be.
I guess so.
That's what it is. It's 3 years in a row now, and I didn't realize that.
And look at the matchups.
Yeah.
Look at the matchups.
Matchup independent.
49ers, Eagles. Come on.
The Eagles.
He got it done.
And the fact that he had the receiving touchdown against the Eagles too is just the Cardinals had nothing to play for. You know what I'm saying? They had 0 to play for. He's coming through. It's this is a game script where they're going to be throwing the ball a whole lot. They'll be playing from behind against the Eagles, and he comes through and he's the engine. And he carries them straight through, makes it a competitive game script. It's freaking hilarious. I like James Conner. I think that's a fun call. You know what I'm saying? But if you want to talk about the most underrated difference maker, I've thought about Michael Pittman. I don't think DJ Moore is that underrated. I think that he's been underrated his whole career, but in terms of fantasy this season, I don't think he's been underrated. We knew what was going on with him and Justin Fields when they were playing together. Very good. I'm going with David Njoku. Because you think of, and we can make this argument about any Browns player pretty much, any Browns receiver, because there was so much turnover at quarterback for the Browns this season. But independent of quarterback, whoever was throwing the ball, David Njoku just kept getting it done. Now, he started really quiet. He didn't have any top 24 finishes in the first 4 weeks, so that was tough. But after the bye then, he finally puts it together. Listen to some of these targets, the number of targets that he's got in games after week 7. 9, 8, 6, 9, 15, 9, 6, 8, 14, 9, 8. Target share demon. This guy was just getting a bunch of targets regardless of anything. And then the production followed suit. He had double-digit fantasy points in every game after week 7 besides in week 13 against the Rams. And then after week 13 against the Rams, Joe Flacco comes in, and he's an absolute playoff monster. This guy had 27 points, 26 points, 16 points, 17 points, all top 6 finishes. A couple top 2 finishes in there. He came through when it mattered. And I don't think anybody really, obviously he had those 4 games at the end. And then, like you mentioned, people were giving David Njoku's flowers. But then even before that, this guy was a consistent tight end 1 every single week. And you probably didn't have him in your lineup if you had other guys like Trey McBride come on, or if you had Sam Laporta, that kind of thing. But David Njoku, he's been a tight end one, and he's been fantastic this season. I think that he was very underrated up until Joe Flacco came in, and then that really put a magnifying glass on what he's been doing. But when you look at the way the Browns are playing and what they had to deal with in terms of the quarterback turnover, to have him be that consistent from week 7 on, I think that deserves some flowers here, and it's still underrated that he was able to do that.
Yeah, no, I'm with you, man. And it's interesting. I'm looking at these other tight ends here, and this is the most random note that I'm about to give you right now.
All right.
Okay, are you ready? Yeah. This is another tight end here. Did you know that Cole Kmet? Okay, Cole Kmet.
Yeah.
How? If you had to guess how many top 10 finishes Cole Kmet has had this year, what would you guess?
Okay. So I might know this because I had him in my Dynasty League, and he was actually a really underrated start. So out of how many games did he play? Was it a full 17? No, he missed. He essentially missed last week.
No, he missed a couple games.
Yeah. So I'm going to go.
I'll tell you right now.
Yeah, how many games did he play?
Yeah, he missed. He basically missed last week. So he played every other game.
Okay. So I
think he missed one in week 7 too.
All right. So he had 15 games, we'll say, out of 15 games. I'm going to go with.
Nope, 16 games actually.
16 games. Okay.
16 games.
Out of 16 games, I'm going to go with 10.
You were on the money. No, actually 9. He had 9 top 10 finishes. Not something that I would have guessed.
No, you wouldn't have.
Not something that I would have guessed because the names around him. Are you ready? I'll just rank them for you. The guys who finished top 10 the most: Evan Ingram, T.J. Hawkinson, Sam Laporta, Travis Kelce, George Kittle had 9, and so did Cole Kmet, followed by David Njoku and Dalton Schultz and Dalton Kincaid. That's surprising to me, man. It really is.
Yeah.
So maybe, see, the thing is, Cole Kmet wasn't a whole lot of people weren't starting him in redraft.
Oh yeah, I know.
Right. And you kind of never knew when to start him. That was the problem.
If you were just consistent and started him, if you just started him every week, you would have gotten the most out of him. But then also with Cole Kmet, top 10's cool, but you think about top 10 performance from a tight end, how many points is that? It's like 10, 11. I don't know if I want to call him he was underrated. I don't know if I want to call him a difference maker. David Njoku was pretty good.
No, I agree.
What I'm saying?
No, 1,000%. Yeah, he's not in the running for this particular category, but I was just kind of surprised just while I was looking at while I was looking at the guys we were just talking about. I'm like, wait, what the heck is
What's
this?
What's funny with Cole Kmet is that he actually played. I don't want to say he played better, but he actually got a little bit of a production boost as soon as Tyson Bagent came in. He had 17.9 and 23.5. In those 2 games, in 2 of those games, I remember, and he also had, it looks like 10 points in the next game. But he actually got a little bit more consistent with Tyson Bagent at quarterback. I thought that was funny because I actually benefited from that when I had him in my Dynasty League.
There you go. All right, a couple more guys. Most improved player, and I'm not sure if you have any more, but I have 2 guys on my list here.
There's only one on mine.
Number 1 is Rachaad White, and Nico Collins is number 2.
Yeah.
Okay. Rachaad White was not consistent in the run game, was not good in the run game last year. And then he still caught 50 balls in year 1, but he wasn't efficient there either.
Right.
But this year, man, looking good in the run game, getting volume in the run game, taking over that backfield, and ended up getting it done in a huge way. Nico Collins, similar thing, right? He didn't have many good games, last year. And he ended up coming through big time. And he ended up finishing as a top 12 wide receiver in points per game. So, who you got, Zach?
I'm going with Rachaad White. And I'm doing this, we might as well just call this the snub Nico Collins episode because I keep doing that. You know what I'm saying? I keep snubbing your boy. But I'm going with Rachaad White here just because last season he wasn't great. And then coming into the season, the general consensus was this guy's just going to be a volume play. The upside's not going to be there, and he's not going to be consistent. It's going to be very week to week. If the Buccaneers can be in a positive or a competitive game script, that's what we're going to be looking at. And you also look at the sentiment surrounding the Buccaneers offense. I think I said it on this podcast that the Bucs might have the worst offense in the NFL, which was obviously a bad call because Baker Mayfield was playing pretty good this season too. Also a candidate for me, if you ask me, because Baker Mayfield came through. He was a solid quarterback, but he wasn't top of the line. But you look at Rachaad White, the way that he was able to produce. He had, even though we talk about his consistency, he had a couple boom weeks. He had 27 points against Houston. He had 22 points against Green Bay. He had 22 points against Atlanta, and those 2 games were back-to-back. In the playoffs, he didn't really let you down besides in Week 17. I think that's really good improvement, especially on the offense he's on. If they can get even better, I think there's a chance they could get even better next season if they get that continuity at quarterback. I like Rachaad White. I think that he's easily the most improved. Nico Collins is there, but you talk about what we were getting last year from Rachaad White, and then compared to what we got this year from Rachaad White, it's night and day.
100%. I'm with you on that one. I like Rachaad White as well, and we're going to go over his efficiency numbers as well. We're going to be putting a post out on that very soon on Instagram, so stay tuned for that. Best comeback player of the year: Dak Prescott, Baker Mayfield, Joe Flacco, and Breece Hall. The reason why Breece Hall is on here because he tore his ACL last year, relatively early in the year. He ended up coming back, putting on a pretty good season. Not really consistent, but he ended up coming through big time in the playoffs. Joe Flacco, we talked about it. Like, he ended up rising from the dead. Yeah. Unfortunately, didn't have a full season. So it's hard to really put him there. Dak Prescott didn't have the best of years last year, but ended up, coming in and, being in the MVP running. Mm-hmm. But Baker Mayfield, man, rising from the dead also, kind of like carrying this team, on his shoulders, making Mike Evans extremely fantasy relevant as well. Wide receiver 1. Yep. Okay. For me personally, I think I'm going Baker, dude.
I think I agree. And I don't want to – I'm just going to touch on Dak Prescott here. I don't want to put him in the comeback player category. I think he was fine last year. He had the interceptions, but he also threw the most touchdowns of any quarterback once he got back from that injury earlier in the season. And that was the case. And
the thing for me, though, with Dak is that I think he finished as, like, the QB, 17 or 18 for fantasy last year, and just like...
Are you talking total points, or are you talking points per game?
He wasn't great. Points per game.
I don't think it was that bad. Like, maybe I just have my Cowboys blinders on. You know what I'm saying? It could be. But like I said, he was scoring touchdowns last year. It's not like he wasn't scoring and he wasn't producing. Like, I'm just gonna pull up his game log since we're talking about him. Let's see.
He was the QB 13 in fantasy points per game. So not as bad as I thought. Maybe I was looking at cumulative points.
It might have been cumulative points, but this is what I'm talking about. Like, week 8 against Chicago, he comes back 26 points. The week after that, 21, 20. He had a couple 20-point performances. He had a bunch of top 10 performances. Like, I don't want to put him in that conversation as comeback because he still had a solid season last season. And he's playing better this season, don't get me wrong, but not really comeback material. Baker Mayfield is comeback material. I really want to give this one to Joe Flacco, but since I've been using the whole, you missed some games, so we can't give you that award argument for a couple other guys this season, I'm not going to give it to Joe Flacco, but Joe Flacco 100% is deserving of it. But it has to be Baker Mayfield. I think that you look at where he was coming in the season, he wasn't even a thought as anything in fantasy football. Nobody was drafting him. He was on the waiver wire. They're pretty much just leaving him out for dead. And he was one of the most consistent quarterbacks. And I put him right in that light with a guy like Jordan Love. Obviously the ceiling wasn't always there 100%, but that floor pretty much every week was there. And you knew that you were going to get something out of him. He had that connection with Mike Evans. And then, like you also mentioned, he made Mike Evans relevant. Like, I think that value that he gave the Buccaneers offense in general is worth putting him there as the biggest comeback player, because not only did he make himself relevant, he made other players relevant.
Yeah, man, and this is going to be his first 4,000-yard season of his career. He already passed his highest touchdown mark. He went 26 touchdowns and 8 interceptions in 2020 with Cleveland, and he's at 28 touchdowns and 10 interceptions this year. With he's going to go over 4,000 yards, in this game this week.
He could go 4,000 yards. He could lead this touchdowns. Team. That's pretty good.
Exactly, pretty good, man, pretty good, and he can lead his team into the playoffs as well. So Baker Mayfield's my pick as well. Baker Mayfield's gonna, it's very interesting, man. I think I think they should bring him back next year. He should be their starter.
Yeah.
Right. Like I don't know if there's any other options that they have right now.
No. Because they're back to purgatory with quarterbacks. No.
Exactly.
You can't.
Okay. We got the biggest breakout this year: Jordan Love, Sam Howell, Kyron Williams, and Rachaad White. I think this is a tough category right here. Okay.
I don't think it's that tough.
I you don't think so?
No, I have my pick.
Sam Howell, I think I have to eliminate him.
Yeah.
First, because He didn't come through towards the end, and he did great for fantasy, but he made you nervous as hell whenever he did it
Mm-hmm.
because he was doing a lot of it in garbage time.
Yeah.
Not sure how much of a difference he made for a lot of teams, especially towards the end of the year. Jordan Love, Kyron Williams, Rashad White. It's really, really hard not to go Kyron Williams, right?
Yeah,
It's really
it's
hard
really
not to.
hard to not go Kyron Williams. That's who I'm picking. I'm going with Kyron Williams. The thing for me about you talk about Sam Howell being here. I think he deserves to be here. But when you talk about breakout, or at least when I hear breakout, it means establishing yourself now and then also having a bright future ahead of you. We don't know what the future is with Sam Howell. Like a breakout, we're not going to have a breakout. If a guy has one good game in season and then the rest of his games, if we can see obvious holes as to why that game happened and it's not going to happen again, like that's not a breakout. That's just a solid game. Cool. Sam Howell's the same way. We don't really know what his future is. He wasn't even supposed to start last week. It was going to be Jacoby Brissett. I'm not going to call that a breakout. But Kyron Williams, that is the definition of a breakout. Literally just out of nowhere, left field, comes out, is the RB. He was an RB2 in fantasy points per game, this season. And he missed those 4 games. To come out and do that on an offense where you weren't even a thought, and we talk about this all the time. I can go back on this Rams offense so many times. Now you have Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp in that same offense with Matthew Stafford throwing the ball. You're still going to be scoring all these touchdowns, all these fantasy points. Kyron Williams, he's the easy pick, and we can talk in the depth. But what he did this season, he was pretty much an automatic top 10 running back every single week with top 1 upside every single week that he played. So you can't take away from what he was doing. That is the definition of a breakout. He broke out this season. He has a fantastic outlook moving forward. Sean McVay is going to be back. As long as he's part of that offense, I don't think there's going to be any trouble. He's definitely the biggest breakout of 2023.
Only one player had more top 5 finishes than Kyron Williams this year, and that was Christian McCaffrey. And remember, Kyron Williams missed a bunch of games this year.
Yeah.
Okay, keep that in mind. All right, I agree. Kyron Williams here. Who was the biggest sleeper of the year, man? I think it was the 2 guys we've been snubbing, Nico Collins and Rashad White. Okay, Nico Collins, he was probably was a little bit more of a sleeper than Rashad White because Rashad White was being taken in the 6th and 7th rounds.
Right.
Nico Collins wasn't being taken until the 15th round. So, do you have any other candidates here besides these guys?
No, I don't think I do. Based on what we've seen, obviously hindsight's 2020, so we could name a bunch of sleepers at the beginning of the season, but you look back.
Are you snubbing Nico Collins once again?
No, I'm not snubbing Nico Collins once again. I'm going to give him this one because I don't think Rashad White was as much of a sleeper as he was just, like we said, acknowledging that the upside wasn't really going to be there. And then it ended up kind of being there with Rashad White. So that was nice. But Nico Collins was a definition of a sleeper because I don't think anybody was taking him, expecting him to be like a consistent week-to-week starter. They were looking at him like, okay, he'll have a game here or there. And I think a lot of people were concerned about CJ Stroud being the quarterback too. Obviously, there was no reason for that. Hindsight, again, 2020. But people were worried about CJ Stroud, like, oh, it's a rookie. And we've seen Texans quarterbacks, kind of go down the shitter a bunch of times this in the past couple of years since Deshaun Watson left. But CJ Stroud came in, turned that narrative 100% around. And now you have Nico Collins here. I think he was the biggest sleeper and it's easy for me to name him the biggest sleeper because you were also on him. We talked about him a lot over the offseason being one of those guys. So I'm definitely gave him the biggest sleeper award.
I agree. He was the biggest sleeper, and I'm glad I was able to identify that on all my fantasy teams. Biggest game of the year. CeeDee Lamb's 40 points in the championship. Jamar Chase's 60-point game in week 3 or whatever it was. I don't care that Jamar Chase scored 60 points in week 3. I care that CeeDee Lamb scored 40 points in the championship to win some games. He won you some championships, right? And that's what matters.
Yeah.
He scored the big game. He had the big game when it mattered. For me personally, I got to go with CeeDee Lamb.
Yeah. And I think that's the only answer. If you take in the context of how the performance happened, when it happened, that makes 100% sense. The top performer in championship week is probably always going to be the biggest game of the year, technically. But I do want to mention Devon Achane earlier in the season because he had that 50-point performance, 4 total touchdowns in a game where Raheem Mostert, another running back, had 4 total touchdowns. Like, that was huge. Like, come on. I don't want to just leave that out. even though it was way early on in the season. He probably wasn't even in many people's rosters at that point. Big game on the bench. You want to talk about big game on the bench? That was definitely Devon Achane. But I don't want to take away from the fact that he did it either, because that was just an absolute scoring festival that week. The Dolphins put up 70 points, freaking hilarious. CeeDee Lamb is the pick, but Devon Achane is an honorable mention in my book.
I have all the top five, all the top fantasy performances. So Jamar Chase was number one, 52.2 points in week 5. Amari Cooper in week 16. Don't forget that game. He was 51.5 points in that game. This is PPR. And you mentioned the Devon Achane game, 51.3 points in week 3. Raheem Mostert ended up scoring 45.2 points in week 3 as well. That same game. DJ Moore, remember, I think that was a Thursday night football game. 49 points in week 5. Christian McCaffrey, 48.7 points in week 4. Keenan Allen had a 45-point game in week 3 as well. Week 3 was just bananas. So many big games in week 3. Tyreek Hill, to start the season off, 44.5 points in week 1. And then Breece Hall had that 43-point game just a few weeks ago. So,
huge.
Some big games here. Some big games. Okay, moving on. Next award. Let's see. We got the biggest bust of the season. Austin Eckler, Tony Pollard, Travis Kelce, and Patrick Mahomes. There was only one of these guys that was picked early in the first round, Zach. And that was Austin Eckler. And he ended up getting hurt early. You couldn't use him. And then he came back. He had a couple of usable games. And then went to shit. And you couldn't use him at all. And it was brutal. I think he was definitely the bust of the year. I think Tony Pollard is close, but he was taken in the second round, and he had some decent games. Okay? Towards the end of the year, fantasy playoffs, he definitely let you down. But so did Austin Eckler. And even before the fantasy playoffs, Austin Eckler didn't get it done for you. And by picking Austin Eckler, that means you might have missed out on some good players. So,
yeah. Well, how many good first-round picks were there based on ADP? Right.
Well, listen, I'd rather have had, obviously CMC, but I'd rather have had Justin Jefferson. I'd rather have had Jamar Chase. I'd rather have had Tyreek Hill. Right? So,
definitely.
You know what I mean? So there were guys there that would have probably helped you out a little bit more than Austin Eckler did this year.
Yeah. I think I'm going to go with Austin Eckler here. The emotions definitely want me to pick Tony Pollard, especially with the way we were talking about him and how everything was set up for him. It was a perfect storm. And obviously the perfect storm proved to be too much. That wasn't the case. But I think the difference maker for me is that you could have skated by having Tony Pollard on your team, maybe made the playoffs. He obviously didn't help you in the playoffs, but maybe you made the playoffs if you had Tony Pollard, because he had some solid games. It's not like he was unusable. He had some quiet games right in the middle, right after the Dallas passing offense started picking up, and obviously CeeDee Lamb came out. But if you look at Austin Eckler, you straight up, like you mentioned, couldn't use him because he was injured. As soon as he comes back, he lulls you to sleep, makes you think he's going to have a solid comeback. He's going to be able to be used, and then he has a terrible season the rest of the way. He lost you so many different games if you had him in your lineup. I think you have to take into account, it's easy to see the whole picture. You sit back and you look at the game log. It's this was a terrible season. But it's even worse in season when you're not sure what's going to happen next. I think that wondering what's going to happen, not knowing for sure if Austin Eckler is going to come through for you or not on a week-to-week basis, and then having him just shit the bed every single time, that's an even worse feeling. That makes him the bust of the year. So I'm in agreement here with you. Travis
Kelce was a bust too, because you could have just picked the tight end later on, right, and be just fine. There was a couple of guys, Sam Laporta, Jay McBride. You obviously during the beginning of the season, you might have had some issues, right? But Travis Kelce in the first round, you picked him there because you were assuming that he was going to be a difference maker at the position, and he wasn't. And I think that was a problem. For Patrick Mahomes in round 2 is probably even worse.
Yeah, Patrick Mahomes was very middle of the pack quarterback. I don't want to say Travis Kelce was a total bust, because by the general tight end standard, he had a very good season. But by his own standard, what you drafted him for, it was a huge bust. And so I think that's the discrepancy that you have to make there, because he had a solid season. It's just not anything close to what we've been used to seeing with him. So I don't think he's a bust.
Yeah, I mean, for me, the bust, the bus is going to like it's going to include where you took him in drafts, right? And if you draft him in the first round, you want him to return to that first round price. Yes, I agree. Like he did have decent games, and he didn't absolutely kill you, but he did kill you in the playoffs. That's for sure.
Yeah.
One of the worst playoff. Like a couple guys here, actually, all four of the guys that I mentioned didn't really have great playoff games. Patrick Mahomes also didn't have a good playoff game at the end of week 17. So, and then I have one more, guys. The most consistent player, Jalen Hurts, Rashad White, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and then I threw Evan Ingram in there. I basically chose one of these guys per position, so I think these guys are the winners for each position. I don't know if you agree with the Evan Ingram one, but I think he was pretty consistent every single week. He had the least, variance out of all the tight ends, like mathematically. And Jalen Hurts, man, every single week he was getting it done. Tush pushes every week almost. Rashad White, similar thing. I think Christian McCaffrey was actually the most consistent. But, like, how many awards can we give Christian McCaffrey? Okay, Rashad White, is going to be that guy for me, right? And then Amon-Ra at the wide receiver position, Amon-Ra, pretty much every single week. He had a couple down games here and there, but he ended up getting it done almost every single week. He was Mr. Consistent, Mr. Reliability.
Yeah, 100%. I think the biggest one for me, if I had to pick one, it would be Jalen Hurts. Yeah. And, like, I'm sorry, but he has had 2 single-digit fantasy points game in the past 2 seasons. That's crazy. He's had 20 points in, I don't know, I could count it up right now. I can't count it on 2 hands. The number of 20-point games that he's had this season and last season is just ridiculous. Like, if you have Jalen Hurts, just automatic QB1 performance. And it doesn't matter, obviously, how the offense looks in Philly, because they've had some terrible weeks these past few weeks. And he's still getting it done. Why? Because of the tush push. It's just an absolute fancy cheat code. Like, if you had to build a fantasy quarterback, like, you need that tush push. 100%. It's like an all-time fantasy cheat code that Jalen Hurts has. That's what I'm going to call that, because no other quarterback has that. He's just delivered to touchdowns. And I can't, for the life of me, I swear no other team has their skill players get tackled at the one more often than the Eagles do. And it just plays right into Jalen Hurts' hand every single time. So that's going to make him the most consistent just by that alone. I'm going with that one, yeah.
Jalen Hurts had the most top 10 finishes of any quarterback this year. He only had 1 top 2 finish, and then Josh Allen only had 1 less top 10 finish than Jalen Hurts, but he had 5 top 2 finishes this year. That was by far the most of any quarterback. So in terms of like the most upside, Josh Allen definitely came through for sure. All right, that's going to do it for the awards. Real quick, guys, I want to talk about these playoff scenarios, okay? And this is going to be really just kind of going through these playoff scenarios, just so you know what to expect, going in. Okay, let's start with the division leaders real quick in the AFC. The AFC North is locked up by the Ravens. Okay, they're the number 1 seed. That is locked up. We could see them rest their starters. Okay, the AFC West locked up by the Chiefs. Their seeding is also locked up, so they could rest their starters as well, and they probably will. NFC North locked up by the Lions. Their seeding is not locked up. Okay, NFC West locked up by the 49ers. Their seeding is locked up. They are the number 1 seed in the NFC. All right. Yep. AFC East. This is where it gets interesting. Okay, the Bills won 4 straight, and they went from like, are they going to make the playoffs, to having a chance at the number 2 seed, but there actually still is a chance that they miss the playoffs. Okay, they're playing against Miami this week. Sunday Night Football, the perfect game to end the regular season, and they have to win. Okay, because if they win the AFC East. They get the number 2 seed. If they lose, they most likely make the playoffs unless the Steelers beat the Ravens, who, by the way, will be resting Lamar and some of their starters, and the Jaguars would have to beat the Titans. And in that scenario, the Bills would lose and make it out of the playoffs. Okay, that's going to be interesting. That's going to be a really good game between Miami and Buffalo. It's going to be a playoff environment for the division.
Yeah, so I'm low-key rooting for the Ravens to lose to the Steelers, and then the Jaguars to beat the Titans, because then that would set up, it would be the 2 seed or bust for the Bills, and that would be a huge game at the end of the season. Yeah. This is an NFL fan. That would be sick.
Yeah, now, because you want it to be, basically you'll be getting an extra playoff game.
Yeah, highly consequential. But, like, oh, my God. Could you imagine being a Bills fan if those situations would play out where the Steelers beat the Ravens, the Jaguars beat the Titans, and then it's winning in or losing out? like completely. Like
Exactly.
oh, it's not going to have the same feeling. The stakes aren't going to be as high if they just fall back to a wild card. Then it's like, oh well, we're just gonna, even if we lose this, it's fine. If they start going down, they'll be like, all right, let's take all our starters out. There's no reason to. We're just gonna accept our seeding. I just want that to happen, Loki. I want that huge matchup at the end.
For sure, I agree. All right, AFC South. The Jaguars, the Colts, the Texans are all 9-7. The Texans are going up against the Colts. The winner will secure a playoff spot regardless, but only as far as the division goes. I'm looking at the Jaguar. If the Jaguars lose to the Titans, then that's the only way that I think the Texans can win the division, if I'm not mistaken. So whoever wins Saturday night gets the playoff spot, and then if the Jaguars win, they get the division. Otherwise, the winner of the Saturday night game is the division winner. Okay, so any three of these teams can end up getting the division, but the Saturday night game is going to be a huge factor there. Okay, whoever makes it in is going to be interesting. If I had to root for a team, it's probably the Texans, because I would love to see C.J. Stroud, in the playoffs to see what they can do. Gardner Minshew would be a nice story, but it's like they're probably not going to be moving forward. But the Texans team, man, they can be sneaky, right? And it'll be interesting to see what they can do there.
I'd love to see C.J. Stroud in the playoffs.
Yeah, exactly.
That all season. I think the Texans would be in already if C.J. Stroud didn't get hurt. You know what I'm saying? I think they would have one of those games. So I'm just gonna go with Texans. That's who I'm rooting for.
So the AFC wildcard spots, right? One of those AFC South teams, will get a wildcard spot, the ones that I just mentioned, and then the Steelers can get a wildcard spot if they beat the Ravens on Saturday night, and then the Bills lose to the Dolphins. Okay. They have a couple ins, actually. The Jaguars could also lose to the Titans. And then the Jaguars could lose, and then the Broncos can win against the Raiders. The Jaguars can win, and the Broncos can win against the Raiders. So they have a few ways to get in. So the Steelers can get in. It'll be crazy, man. Like, Mike Tomlin, once again, just doing what he needs to do to, have a positive season. But nobody wants to see the Steelers in the playoffs, though. Nobody wants to see that.
No.
Okay.
Imagine that with Mason Rudolph at quarterback. Nobody wants to see him. That's crazy.
By the way, the Browns already locked up one of the wildcard spots. They're locked into the 5th seed no matter what, so they'll likely rest their starters as well. Okay. Let's move to the NFC East. The Cowboys and the Eagles both 11-5. The Cowboys have the edge right now. The Eagles play the Giants. The Cowboys play the Commanders. Both, winnable games. I would say that, but the Eagles lost to the Cardinals last week. If both the Eagles and the Cowboys win the division. The Eagles would need to win, and the Cowboys would have to lose, obviously, for them to win the division. Okay, so losing to the Cardinals was really something last week, for sure. It didn't really help the Eagles at all. Okay.
Yeah. Can't clown the Eagles for losing to the Cardinals as a Cowboys fan. Dallas lost the Cardinals earlier in the season with Josh Dobbs at quarterback.
So did they really? That's so funny.
Wait, you don't remember that? Oh, my God.
Did the Cardinals beat the Giants too, or no? Did they sweep the NFC East?
The Giants, well, the Cardinals were up 28 to whatever, like 28-6.
Oh, was that
the Giants came back 34-28. They won.
Was that Daniel Jones in week 2? I think it was.
That was the Daniel Jones week 2 game, yes.
Yes, I remember that. Okay.
He looked like he was back, and then he wasn't.
All right, the NFC South. The Bucs sit atop the division right now. The Saints have the same record at 8-8. The Bucs play Carolina. The Saints play Atlanta. Okay, so the Bucs control their own destiny. So if they win, they're the division winner. Okay, so the Baker Mayfield will be looking to win that game. If they lose, the Saints get the win, and the Saints get the win over Atlanta. The Saints win the division. Okay, Atlanta can only get into the playoffs by winning the division. They need to beat the Saints, and the Bucs need to lose to the Panthers. Atlanta has the edge over both teams in that scenario because of head-to-head. If that happens, they'd make the playoffs with a losing record, which would be something that we would want. Okay, we don't want Atlanta to make the playoffs.
Yeah. The primary takeaway here is root for the Saints and the Buccaneers.
Yes, exactly.
That's it. You have 2 outs. Just don't let the Falcons make it.
All right, last thing here, the NFC wildcard. One of the Cowboys and the Eagles will definitely have the top wildcard spot, depending on who wins the division there. The Rams have a wild card spot locked up as well. They're going to be resting their starters. Matthew Stafford is not playing this week. They're going to play Puka Nacua a little bit until he breaks the records. He can break the rookie reception record, that's Jalen Waddle, and the rookie receiving record, which is Jamar Chase. Okay, so he's looking to break those 2 records this week.
Okay. Question on records. Do you count it for 17 games? I
You
know a
do?
lot of people who are really upset about, not doing it in 16 games. I know some of these players did it in 17 games. But, like,
Well, Jamar
especially
Chase.
the one person, I will name him, my dad, hates the 17-game record thing. He's like, you have to do it in 16 games or it doesn't count. It's like, in 10 years, we're going to be talking about the records all the same because now there's going to be a much
Yeah.
larger sample size of 17-game seasons. But
Jamar Chase
I'm just
ended
wondering,
up.
do you count that?
Yeah, I do. Jamar Chase ended up, breaking the receiving record in 17 games. He is the record holder, so it is what it is.
There you go.
Jalen Waddle. Jalen Waddle. Is it the same year? I think it was, if I'm not mistaken. Jalen Waddle.
I think he had the receptions record. It was 2021 that he was a rookie. Yeah, is that when he did?
Yeah,
it?
2021 was a rookie. So yeah, but he did it in 16 games. But that was the first 17-game season though. So there you go.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So back to the NFC wildcard. The Packers are in a win and in scenario for that last spot. The Bears can play spoiler, right? Because they're playing the Packers, their division rival. They would love to do that. Now, they can still get in if the Vikings, Seahawks, or one of the NFC South wildcard contenders lose. Okay, so I mentioned the Seahawks. They have the same record as the Packers. So, they need the Packers to lose to get in. And then the Vikings, they also have a small shot. But they need a lot of help. They're 7-9 right now, but they would need a lot of help to get in. Okay?
Yeah.
That's it. You're ready. You're ready for Week 18, guys. This was a long ass episode, but we appreciate you guys listening. And we'll be back on Tuesday. We're gonna be talking about, what are we talking about, dude? We're talking. Let's see. We got the Dynasty rankings and update show, and then a Week 18 review. So we're gonna be reviewing these games, getting you ready for wildcard weekend, and we'll also be talking about our Dynasty movers. After I updated my rankings earlier this week. All right. We'll see you guys then.
Right.
Take it easy. See ya.